Hello and welcome to Off Label, the podcast where we celebrate the power of marketing in the pharma industry and beyond. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Damon Harrell, former VP at Alchemies. Damon, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me, Ed.
Now, look, you and I have known each other for a long, long time, collectively decades experience in the pharma industry. And in preparation for today's discussion, we had a call beforehand just to kind of see the lay of the land. And you said something to me that I thought was very, very interesting, which is marketing is just marketing. And there might have even been an expletive thrown in there at some point. Um, let's start by what did you mean by that?
It's fundamental, right? When you think about good marketing, you've got supply, which is your product, and you've got demand, which is your customer. Really good marketing requires a deep understanding of your customer. What do they need? What are their unmet needs? How does your product differentiate in their mind? What are the features and benefits they're looking for? Deep understanding of your customers is what marketing is, right? In between supply and demand, your product and the customer, is delivery. And you've got to figure that out from an executional standpoint. But all good marketing is about understanding your customer. It's about using data to make informed decisions about how to connect with them. I had a marketing professor in business school who said, good marketing is when your customer says, I love it when you talk to me like that. That's all marketing.
I think marketing is one of these professions and specialties that is so misunderstood that, particularly in pharma, actually, where, I'm sure you and I both had this experience where, someone say, oh, you do marketing. Oh, so you just create the adverts and the sales aid, right? And you're like, no, 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 no. Like, it's so much more than that. So you and I both know this, but how can we help our colleagues and the other functions in pharma companies better understand what marketing is really about?
It's a great question. And I think a part of it is the obligation to let people peek behind the curtain a little bit. So my last company, Alchemies, I joined them to do commercial strategy for new products in a company that had never launched a product in its history. And so to your point, that misperception of what marketing is, people think it's like cliche Mad Men, right? Guys having 3 martini lunches and just, spitballing ideas. Good marketing is data driven, right? You can do really sophisticated quantitative market research and analysis that tells you A will move more share than B, right? In the pharma industry, you make target product profiles before you even have a product. And you had iterations of that product profile that are driven by what you expect your label to look at. And as you alter that product profile, the market research will tell you that people will use your product differently, which will lead to different market share and different performance of your product. I spent a ton of time in my early days at Alchemies showing people behind the curtain, like, this is how we do this. This is a discrete choice quantitative analysis that has 1,000 inputs. It's not just, I think I'd like to use these words and make this statement. It's driven by putting data in front of customers and understanding how they react to that data, whether it's messaging, efficacy endpoints, tolerability, side effects, comparison to competitive products. That analysis is a deeply data-driven quantitative process. But if you've never seen it before, the marketing guy shows up and says, we need it to look like this. And the people in the room are like, well, I guess that's just his preference. That's bad marketing, right? Good marketing is data-driven decisions driven by understanding your customers.
And do you think once you've shared that, particularly, and I'm really thinking about our medical colleagues who just through their own training are very, number one, numerate, but also two, they look at data heavily. Like, does that give them that level of comfort in a way that sort of other ways in which you try and convince them maybe wouldn't?
Yeah, I think it does, right? So when we sat down with our clin ops team, right, and said, this is why we want the study to be designed in a particular way, and it's backed by this data and this research, and we shared the data and the research, it really resonated with them. They're like, oh, I understand why you want this, right? specific to sort of new products, right? A really good day in the world of new products is when your commercial person can say, this is what we need to say in the marketplace to be successful. And then your regulatory person says, well, if that's what you want to say, this is the burden of proof. This is the hurdle you need to clear with your data. And then your ClinOps team, your clinical research team says, well, if that's the burden of proof and that's the evidence and the data, this is the study you have to run, right? That is a very virtuous cycle. When you get that right, you can develop and launch really successful programs. Where it goes sideways is when the commercial guy has some half-baked idea about how he thinks the FDA is going to react to a regulatory issue. That's not your swim lane. Or your medical team heard from some key opinion leader that the most important thing is this fancy, nuanced scientific issue. And they're telling the commercial team that's what we should be promoting. That's probably not right, right? Key opinion leaders, with all their brilliance, are by definition outliers. They should not be driving how you want to compete in a prescribing market. So you see it go sideways for different reasons, but when you can keep that virtuous circle of commercial understands the market, regulatory understands the burden to make something appropriate and promotable, and your medical and clinical teams say, we know how to generate that data, that's when you're having a good time.
So, I mean, there's so much to unpack on just a couple of things you just said. I want to start by looking at the TPP. So, for those who aren't familiar in pharma, it's a target product profile. And companies use it in an iterative way to kind of shape what the product looks like so you can start to get it to market in a way that makes sense. But when do you think a TPP should be started? Like, are we talking phase one? Does it happen even before that? And also, what's your experience of adjusting TPPs as the product matures through the different stages of clinical development?
It's a great question, and it's a little bit of a how long is a piece of string type answer.
Okay.
The earlier, the better, always. In new product commercial strategy, I was having conversations even in the preclinical stages,
Okay, wow.
because you can articulate then, I'd rather it looks more like A than like B. And your preclinical team said, oh, well, we think then you're going to want more activity at this receptor site versus that receptor site. And they can start thinking about that really early on. From a more practical standpoint, um, you'll see really early commercial engagement in larger companies because you've got somebody who's always sat in the chair of commercial new products because you've got a portfolio of goods, you're generating revenue, you can afford that sort of staffing. Where it becomes more difficult is in small companies. When are you going to bring on the headcount for your commercial team when you don't even have an approved product and you're not generating any revenue, right? That's always the friction. But even there, you're going to want to have a commercial person in place phase two, right? As you get your phase two data, you're going to want commercial input prior to your phase three study design.
Yeah.
Because if you don't get it, you're not going to make the right study design. You're not going to collect the right endpoints. You'll collect the endpoints that regulatory says you need for FDA, but that may not be what's going to differentiate your product to make you competitive in the market. So if you don't have commercial input as a part or prior to your phase three, you're late.
In terms of most marketers, I would say most marketers don't unfortunately get to see the products on that entire journey from phase two into phase three into launch. So they don't have that. They're not pulling on the right levers, right? Because they're not really being able to shape the product. They're often either in market or when the phase three design has actually been set up. So in that situation, what recommendations would you make for a marketer around how they can think about bringing the products to become a brand, and then how the different marketing levers they can pull because the product itself is effectively set?
Let's say you already have your phase two data and you've already designed your phase three study and it's up and running. And then you come in as the commercial marketing person. At that point, you know what the endpoints are going to be. You know what you're testing for efficacy. You know what you're tracking for tolerability, side effects, dosing, titration, all of those things. You don't know what the exact result's going to be of the phase three study, but you know what all the opportunities are for your product to differentiate. And that's where you start iterating on the TPP. Maybe our efficacy is 5 out of 10. Maybe it's 8 out of 10. Maybe we're better tolerated than something else in the market. Maybe we're dosed differently than something else in the market. Even though you've come in and phase 3 is already baked, you still have the opportunity to have a really deep, robust exploration of what are the data points that can help my product differentiate, and do those data points address unmet needs of the customers that I'm targeting. So sure, it would have been best if you had input on the phase 3, but even without input, you still have the opportunity, and I would say the obligation, to deeply understand what are your opportunities to differentiate your product.
So effectively what you're saying is what you can change is much more restrictive because the product is the product. But how you think about your market and your customers and what they want, etc., shouldn't be limited by that fact.
Correct. So how are you going to compete in the market, right? Um, there are markets where they're efficacy driven. There are markets where they may be tolerability driven. There are markets where I can think of one right now. There's a new class of drugs for the treatment of schizophrenia that are called muscarinics. DMS bought a company called Karuna to launch a product called Cobenfy, which is the first and only muscarinic. It requires titration and it requires fasting, which are really challenging for patients in the mental health space. The next product that comes to market, even if the phase 3 is completely baked, they may realize, you know what, we need to focus on easier titration, better tolerability, no fasting, right? That may be how you choose to differentiate your product. In another space, you may say, nobody cares about that stuff. It's all about efficacy and lab tests. All right, so that's where you're going to put your focus. That's where you're going to manipulate your TPP to look at what happens with different efficacy endpoints. So again, it's about understanding your target customer. What is it they're looking for? How does your product differentiate from existing products? You need to make choices as the marketer as to where you're going to emphasize and how you're going to focus your messaging. Don't focus your message on uh, fancy mechanism of action and receptor activity if the prescribers don't actually care about that, right? In some spaces like oncology, that's hugely important. In other spaces, not so much. But you need to understand your market to understand where to put your emphasis.
So we've talked a lot about the importance, regardless of where the product is in its development, to deeply understand your customers. I'm going to make a leap and sort of read a bit between the lines there that actually a lot of people don't bother or don't feel the need to understand their customers. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Yes. Um, Particularly acute, I think, in pharmaceuticals, and doubly so for companies that have not launched products before. There is a tendency to fall in love with your product. It's innovative science. It's something no one's done before. Um, it's receptor site activity or drug combinations that nobody's ever thought of. Um, when you get in that headspace, you move into a world of focusing on supply. And as I said to begin with, supply is not where you focus, right? I have seen molecules that are incredibly sophisticated and amazing science that nobody wants to use or prescribe because they don't care about the fancy science. I have had conversations with clinical teams and researchers that are excited because they've done something no one's ever done before. The reason no one has ever done it before is nobody wants it, right? It's just that simple. But you fall in love with the fact that you've done something that is scientifically amazing, something that may be very exciting to the thought leaders and the academics, but means very little to the actual clinicians and healthcare providers who prescribe the product. That disconnect definitely happens in pharma, and it's at higher risk to happen for products that or companies that don't have a lot of experience launching products.
So are you really saying there's that disconnect from reality? You know that you've created this amazing thing and you know it's going to change the world, and yet the customer's like, I don't really give a shit.
Sure, sure, because who are you working for, right? So your clin ops team, they're getting a lot of input from key opinion leaders and thought leaders and academics, right? If that is your information feed and that's what you think that's the group you think you're trying to please, that is different in all likelihood than trying to please the clinician who's in office treating patients. The other friction you see is we're having all these wonderful conversations about how this thing's going to compete in the marketplace, and it isn't even approved yet. Your regulatory team doesn't actually care how competitive your product is. They want to please the FDA so that the darn thing gets approved, which is a different question, right? The easiest, lowest risk way to get a product approved is to replicate the study of the last product that was approved. If that's all you do, you are launching a Me Too product with no differentiation that is late to market. That's a tough sell, but it's also probably your lowest risk proposition with the FDA and how to get your product approved. So you've got those sort of 3 points of friction. What are you getting from the thought leaders who are helping you design your trials and helping you sort of discover the molecules? What are you getting from your regulatory team who's trying to figure out how to appease the FDA? And then what does the commercial team know about the end user? Those 3 things don't always align.
So that I can imagine come to a head when somebody has to make a call about a trial or whatever. And is that normally the CEO? Is that where it always that's the lap in which it lands?
I would say it depends on the size of your company, right? You and I were at Merck for a while. You know, the CEO at Merck is not weighing in on product profiles and drug development programs. They've got their hands on other things. In a smaller company, yes, it may actually end up being the CEO. But at the end of the day, you need alignment on what it takes for the product to be successful in market, right? So back to the conversation we were having about commercial, regulatory, clin ops, medical. I, at one point in my career, had a product that we were working on, and the market research was telling us, these are the messages that resonate with prescribers. This is how you talk about your product. This is how you talk about the mechanism. And the head of medical and clinical operations said, that's not how we talk about our product. That's not how we talk about the product with the thought leaders and the study teams and the sites. So we're not going to talk about the product that way. We're not going to let those doctors tell us how to talk about our product. And I said to him point blank, I was like, actually, yes, we are. We're going to talk to them in the way that they want to be spoken to. If they say, call it, potato versus potato, I don't care what you're doing with the thought leaders. I'm calling it potato. And we sat down and I said, here's the market research. We tested all these different messages, inclusive of the ones that you're using on the medical side, and they don't resonate with prescribers. And his comment was, well, it's their fault if they don't understand us. And I said, no, actually, it's our fault if they don't understand us. And I'm not going to make that mistake.
It's a tenet of the customer is always right, and the customer is always right. If they want to hear about it in one way, great. That's how you pitch it. Sure, over time you have to shape how they think about it, but you've got to meet them where they are rather than where you want them to be.
That's right. Now, I'll push back a little bit on the customer's always right. What the customer might want may not be good for your long-term strategy, in which case you do have to push back, right? If the customer wants something that is simple and easy and works today, but is going to pigeonhole your product and give you limited market share and performance in the long term, you've got to work on shaping the market. So what the customer wants to hear isn't always the thing you're going to do. But if there's a bucket list of like, here's how we drive to our long-term strategy, please pick off my a la carte menu. You go with the one that they pick.
So you've talked a lot about the role of KOLs in sort of shaping the product, and like, what's that balance between getting their involvement? Because I would argue they're often the ones who arguably know more about the future than the sort of the day-to-day jobbing physicians, but they're very disconnected from the current day-to-day. So how do you get that balance between what the KOL says and what the current physician today is believing?
So the challenge, as you've sort of articulated, the challenge is a lot of your thought leaders are academics who rarely actually treat patients anymore. They publish, they present, they're speakers, they're leads at congresses, they sit on advisory boards. They are more future thinking, I think, as you said. Um, they're going to give you the best ideas around how to develop a product. But the things that they like, the things that they find to be innovative, may not be the things that drive actual behavior in the clinic. And that's where you have to differentiate. Um, the first KOLs you're going to talk to are going to help you with selection around molecules and receptors, right? What receptors should you be targeting? Okay, that's a great question. You need that as a part of your drug development. But the end prescriber may not actually care what receptors you're targeting. And that's fine, because you wouldn't have gotten a good product unless you understood from the KOLs, what's our receptor target? What's the mechanism of action we should be focused on? But when the product actually comes to market, that may not be the thing that's going to drive acceptance of the product, right? You may have focused on those particular receptors and that particular mechanism of action or disease pathway, because when you rest in that spot, products are really well tolerated. All right, at the end of the day, that's what I'm going to promote. How well tolerated is this thing? How happy is your patient going to be when you give them this product? Most of the time, the prescriber is not going to care about the receptor activity. They're not going to care about the mechanism. They care about the results for their patient. And that's when you differentiate what's the actual need of the person who has to use your product, which may not be what drove your development program.
I want to change gear a little bit. We've talked about marketing and the role of marketing working with ClinOps as the product development. I want to bring it when the product is in market. So there has been a lot of investment, noise, and attention played to omnichannel marketing. Now, I have a view about omnichannel, which is that I think it always feels a little bit out of reach. Like, am I wrong in that? Like, where do you see companies with omnichannel? Do you know anyone who's doing it well? Like, where are companies struggling?
The people that are doing omni-channel best are probably companies that are most focused on consumer marketing, consumer goods. Even there, I'm not sure they're doing it really that well. And I would say most pharma companies are not doing it well. I actually had a really interesting conversation with a venture capital guy who specializes in AI. And we were talking that multi-channel seems to be the place where AI could actually help optimize and improve what companies are doing with the multi-channel space. And his point was he has no evidence that they've actually succeeded.
Right. Okay.
But in theory, it should be able to help there. And just for context, for those in the audience who may be less familiar with the whole concept, multi-channel marketing is when you reach your customer in multiple ways: email, phone call, iPhone, websites, personal promotion, print ads. Those are all channels for communication. Multi-channel communication can be a horrible end user experience because the person who called you has no idea that somebody else sent you an email, who has no idea that you've actually been in the building and talked to somebody live, who has no idea that they already mailed you a registration form a week ago, right? That's multi-channel marketing, but it's a crappy end user experience. The idea behind omni-channel is that all of those multiple channels will speak to and inform each other. So I know that you received my email. I know that you went to my lecture series. I know that you were at this medical congress. I know that one of my salespeople was in your building, and that informs the next thing I will do from a marketing perspective, right? The data as you collect it should inform you the right sequence of events is optimized as ABC or CBA, right? The data will tell you people respond best with a certain series of engagements, but nobody's doing that well, right? The sales reps probably don't know who went to the medical congress. The sales reps may not know that your patient support services called the nurses and helped them get somebody on product. My email doesn't inform my next email, right? I don't think anybody's doing that well, but I think there's I'm optimistic that AI, one of the things it could do is help optimize all of that multi-channel work and make it real omni-channel results.
I mean, I think one of the things that I see about omnichannel is unlike other industries where, I mean, certainly B2C businesses where the customer is just online. Like there's so much of it's online, they just gather data. So I'm thinking of like booking.com or whatever. But in pharma, most businesses, most companies have a physical sales representative or maybe an MSL. And there's that disconnect between what they do in the physical world and what the customer does in the online world. And I've never really seen a company really fully knit those two together. I mean, have you ever seen that? Or and I mean, why do you think that doesn't happen?
So I've seen it. Um, so we had a suite of emails available to the sales reps that they could send to customers. Um, some used them, some didn't use them. Some used them as a lead, some used them as a follow-up. So the resources were there and available. They were not used systematically. They were not used with the level of sort of rigor and diligence that allowed you to optimize it. Now, as to the why, um, you are probably correct as a personal promotion salesperson that you have a higher impact with your customer than any other thing the company does. That is fact. That's why we have personal promotion and sales organizations. The skepticism is, if I'm that impactful and that's my job, why do I need this other stuff? Right? You are correct. As the salesperson, you are going to have the highest impact of any resource that we leverage against the customer, but still you should be embracing all these other resources. And it's been really difficult to get that buy-in. And I don't think that's unique to pharma. Um, I know my customer better than the marketing team does. Well, probably true because you're there, we hope, every other week as your routing is designed, spending time with that customer. But what that doesn't mean is that these other resources can't help. And I think that's part of the disconnect.
There's a whole change management piece with the implementation of omnichannel, getting people on board. But I mean, my personal view is I don't think reps are going to go away. There's certainly some voices in the industry who say, reps are dead and you don't need reps and it's all about medical or MSLs or you just don't need any field teams. I mean, what's your view on having in-field support, be it medical or being it more directly promotional through the sales team?
I don't think products can be successful without face-to-face engagement with the customers. The friction it's a really expensive resource, right? If you're running anything outside of rare disease, like ultra rare disease, probably the most expensive investment you have is your sales organization. So there is always a friction from, call it the home office. Do we really need to spend all that money, right? And if you are a supply side thinker and believe you have the best mousetrap, and you believe that consumers are 100% rational, everybody will pick your mousetrap because it's better than the others. But we know that consumers and healthcare providers are consumers are not 100% rational. So the expectation that they're going to make 100% rational, fully informed decisions is just false. Your sales organization is there to make sure they are, one, fully informed, right? Healthcare providers, prescribers, specialists, whoever you want to sort of categorize them, when they get updates to their treatment guidelines, have a guess at how long it takes the average physician to adopt the new treatment guidelines.
Months, years, long time.
10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When guidelines are updated in any space other than oncology, it takes 10 years before they actually become standard practice, right? Your sales organization is trying to accelerate that behavior change because the tendency for healthcare providers like the rest of us is when they graduate medical school, there's a sense of, I know everything I need to know. And generally they practice medicine like the day they left medical school for a really long time. It is really hard to change those habits and behaviors. And they're unfortunately have limited time, space, energy, and resources to keep themselves educated and to go out and seek all that additional information that would drive their own change. Your sales organization is a huge lever in making that happen. And I want to come back to something about omnichannel and AI. I mentioned sort of this message optimization process, right? The data should inform itself, tell you what the next best thing to do is. That becomes pseudo-automated, if you will. That makes marketers really uncomfortable also, because they're like, wait, I should be controlling the messages. I don't want the AI to tell me what the message should be. I don't want some center of excellence in omnichannel to be tinkering with my stuff, right? I get it, but if the sales group doesn't trust the home office, if the marketer doesn't trust the center of excellence, that's where it all falls apart. I don't want to make it sound like this is just a marketing sales thing. There's issues around marketers and AI and optimization that also creates friction.
It's the fascination with and fear of the new thing, and I think marketers are like, bees to honey. They're like, oh, this is new, but then they look at it like, oh yeah, actually, God, maybe it's challenging some of my long held beliefs and associated behaviors.
Well, that and just the desire for ownership, right? The sense that I have a nuance for this that nobody else will understand, right? It's hubris that we all have, at least to some extent. I had a funny conversation with someone about scientific platforms, right? Which is the discipline of this message is supported by these 3 data points. And every time we use the message, we reference the same 3 data points. And we already know all the messages we want to use. And the person asked me, they're like, well, why is it that more people don't use scientific platforms like that? And I said, because most people don't embrace the fact that if you have a really good scientific platform, your work should be really repetitive and boring. You shouldn't need to think about it to some degree. There's not a lot of nuance. I'd like to say this slightly differently. I'd like to use my creative muscles. Work's done. We've already decided that's the way to say it, and this is how you reference it. That's how it's going to get approved easiest in your medical legal review process. Market research has told us that's what resonates with the customer. Take off your creative hat and just execute. There's a time for just executing. But if you don't get that buy-in, your scientific platform ends up on a shelf and nobody uses it because they want to do their own thinking.
Yeah. We've been talking for about half an hour now, and I just want to start to wrap us up a little bit by going to our regular slot of hate, rate, and debate about marketing. So let's start with what you hate about marketing, something that really grinds your gears.
Clever does not mean effective. Too often people measure the wrong thing. And I'll give you an example. What commercial do you think has the highest message and brand recall ever in the history of TV commercials?
Oh, God. Tell me.
The answer is there was a cat food commercial called Meow Mix. The entire commercial, it just goes meow, 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 meow. The jingle is meow, 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 meow. Brand recall at the end of that commercial is 100%. That doesn't mean it was a good ad. Really high brand recall, but if you go home and you say, right, we won, we had 100% brand recall. The real question is, did anybody buy your product?
Yeah.
Right? The thing I rant about all the time is people think clever means good, and people measure the wrong stuff to try and figure out if they're doing good work.
Brilliant. And what about something you really rate, something you think is great about marketing?
Let's go back to the omnichannel thing, and this is really specific to pharmaceuticals, right? And because of in the U.S. it's HIPAA patient protection data. There are marketing partners, agencies that you can work with, advertising groups that have gotten unbelievably sophisticated at how they de-identify patient data and yet use it to improve targeting. If you're doing a consumer advertising campaign, there are vendors now that can tell you in that house, there's 3 phones, 2 tablets, and a desktop, and I can tell you which one of them actually got our ad. And if you want to hit them all, you can hit them all. And if you say one is enough, you are then going to spend those dollars someplace else more efficiently. So the targeting and the efficiency that companies are able to produce these days because of their ability to collect and manipulate data is more sophisticated than it has ever been in the history of this space. And it's really quite incredible what they can do.
Amazing. Amazing. And lastly, what's the thing in marketing you think we, the industry, should be debating?
AI. I hate to say it. How are we really going to leverage AI? There are entire companies now in the pharma space that say their competitive advantage is AI. Is it really? I know companies where the mandate is everybody has to use AI 5 times a day. I know companies that have zero mandate and zero expectations. Where we are going as an industry, pharma tends to be slow adopters, right? Where we are going as an industry and how and where we choose to leverage AI, I think is going to be a fascinating series of events. I don't know where it's going. I don't know if AI should be focused on commercial marketing and messaging, or if it should be focused on drug discovery, or everything in between.
Fantastic. Damon, thank you for your time today on joining us on the Off-Label podcast. And thank you for listening to this podcast. If you liked it, give us a like, give us a post, give us a reshare. And if you want to be a guest or you think you've got a great idea of someone who could be a great guest on Off-Label, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me. Damon, thanks very much.
My pleasure, Ed. Really like what you're doing here. Happy to join you.